I want to ask you about the courts. And I want to ask you about this because your mother, Justice Leela Seth, was a fine person, but also a fine judge who, as a woman, broke many barriers in the judiciary. Now,
we both have mothers of that sort, right, Barkha?
That is true. I am happy to say
Barkha Dutt was like a shining example, iconic example of great journalism.
Thank you for remembering her. Fali Nariman once said to me, I think it was 1 month before he died, and he said, when governments in India have been very powerful, and this was not about the BJP, he said the same thing happened in the emergency, right? He said, when governments in India have been very powerful, the judiciary has not been that powerful. That was his somewhat cynical sort of take. And yet, every Indian citizen, if you ask them, what are the two institutions that you turn to in the end? One will be, they'll say the army. They'll say we trust them, and they'll say the courts. In the end, everybody takes their conflicts, their dilemmas, their hope, their expectations to the judiciary. How do you see the role of the judiciary thus far?
Okay. Well, the army has never interfered.
Yes.
There was a book I remember called After Nehru Who, in which the Chief of the Army Staff was considered as one of the possibilities. It was not realistic. India is not Pakistan.
Exactly.
The press is another
story altogether.
Estate, you could call it, to whom people maybe look towards. The television journalism, even worse than print journalism, has disgraced itself. On the other hand, private individuals who set up their own companies or who set up their own web links, whether from abroad or within, have taken the role of that to some extent. And the fact that people can communicate with each other better in social media has also helped a great deal. It's affected the results of this election. Now, as regards the courts.
What would your mother have felt about it today? I'm sure you had those conversations right until the end.
It is complicated. One sometimes one has to look at individual judgments. Insofar as it doesn't, when I take a little time out to think about this, see, we would have been in a worse position, I think, if the courts had not, to some extent, begun to choose their own personnel. I think I said earlier that any institution, whether a religion or courts or whatever, depends upon the personnel who inhabit it. And if it had continued to be the government, by now we would have had a completely dabbu judiciary. There's no question about it. If they had chosen...
If the government had a say in appointing judges?
They do have a say, but they do not have complete say. Even now, they can say, we don't like this judge for this reason or that reason, or they can just sit on an appointment, and they do.
Saurabh Kirpal is a case in point.
It's a graceful example. But there are other examples as well. Certainly not the only one. Also, within the collegium itself, it's not a perfect system by any means. In fact, there are personal antagonisms, possible favoritism, personal lack of knowledge about things. However, it is meant that the government has not had complete sway in selecting its judges. However, the question arises, what will you do after you're 65 in the Supreme Court or after you're 62 in a High Court? And all sorts of little temptations here and there. Judges are also human beings, play their part. There have been certain decisions, and I won't specify them, which have been courageous. There are certain decisions, well, why not specify one? For example, about the electoral bonds issue.
Yeah.
There have been certain decisions which seem to be very odd, like the Babri Masjid decision.
The Ayodhya verdict itself.
The Ayodhya verdict, and also how it began by saying it was completely illegal what they did. However, what can we do? We better endorse it. On the other hand, I would say the same judge, Chandrachud, who wrote that decision, in another case said that the decision of his father in ADM Jabalpur, in the habeas corpus case, was wrong, which itself took a lot of courage. Yeah. So let us just say it's been a mixed bag. But I don't think Fali Nariman was being too cynical when he said what he said. I do think judges sort of swim in the water of our politics and our consciousness, let's say, social consciousness, and to some extent get affected by it, I'd say out of pressure rather than out of, I wouldn't say cowardice, but there is pressure. And the pusillanimity that my mother inveighed against in certain judgments. No one is excluded from that in our polity. Neither journalists, nor bureaucrats, no business people, no judges, no, for that matter, writers and artists who sometimes self-censor themselves.
Do you? I'm
in a comparatively lucky position in that I don't have a family. I don't have to be concerned. I mean, in the sense that I don't have to say, my needs are comparatively simple.
Yeah.
So I can't give myself, too
many pats on the back.
Indeed not. And but yes, I don't also shout from the rooftops unless I find something singularly unjust or singularly worth talking about, whether it's the Babri Masjid thing, or whether it's the 377, or whether it's Hanuman. There's certain things on which I've spoken out. Now, in this particular case, I would not have talked too much about the change of governments, except that I found that all the interviews that I've perforce been made by my publishers to do have come about around the time of the elections, and I haven't tried to avoid questions. That's the reason.
And also, it's a kind of inevitable dialogue that is ongoing in our society, so you can't
I'm a citizen. I have every right to speak my mind.